Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
It's 1:45 a.m. You've worked 8 hours at your desk and another 5 behind the wheel. Your eyes close for just 3 seconds, and the sound of the rumble strips jerks you back to reality. You almost didn't make it home. Burnout isn't just a buzzword. For millions of people chasing a side hustle, it's a dangerous reality. Today, we're diving into a powerful story about the hidden cost of overworking, the moment everything almost went wrong, and how to make tough choices when life pushes you to the edge. As we follow Julian's journey through this 10-chapter story, we'll also break down the essential English vocabulary, idioms, and phrases you need to talk about work, stress, and modern life naturally. Let's look at Chapter 1, the Spreadsheet Mentality.
Julian stared at the glowing rectangle of his laptop screen, his eyes burning in the dim apartment. On the monitor, a precise, color-coded spreadsheet mapped out his life down to the very last penny. In column A was his monthly salary as a corporate inventory analyst, a fixed, stubborn number that never seemed to grow. In column B were his expenses, rising rent, groceries, student loans, and utilities. The mathematical reality was brutal. The margin between survival and financial ruin was paper-thin. "I just need a safety net," Julian muttered to himself, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He didn't want luxury, he just wanted to breathe without a knot in his stomach every time the rent was due. That night, he made a decision. He opened a new tab and signed up to become a driver for a popular rideshare app. It seemed like the perfect modern solution. He had a reliable sedan, a clean driving record, and open evening hours. To make the plan work, Julian created a new tab on his spreadsheet, typing in an ambitious goal: 20 extra hours of driving per week. He calculated the potential earnings, watching the projected total climb. He convinced himself that giving up a few hours of sleep was simply a temporary tactical sacrifice for long-term financial freedom. He could handle the fatigue. After all, it was just mind over matter. With a final satisfying click, Julian saved the file and closed his laptop. He felt a sudden surge of control, unaware that a spreadsheet can easily measure hours and dollars, but it can never calculate the true, exhausting cost of human burnout.
The clock on the office wall clicked precisely at 5 p.m., and the sharp ring of the evening bell echoed through the department. While his coworkers packed their bags and talked about their dinner plans, a different kind of workday was just beginning for Julian. He shut down his office computer, took a deep breath, and walked out into the crowded corporate parking lot. The transition was always the hardest part of the day, requiring a total shift in focus and energy. Sitting in the driver's seat of his silver sedan, Julian quickly kicked off his uncomfortable office dress shoes and pulled on a pair of well-worn sneakers. He reached into the passenger seat, grabbed a cold energy drink from his small cooler, and cracked it open, swallowing the sweet, artificial liquid in 3 large gulps. With a slightly trembling finger, he tapped the bright icon on his smartphone screen to log in to the rideshare application. Within 3 seconds, the phone emitted a loud, high-pitched chime, signaling his very first passenger request of the evening. The pickup location was only 2 blocks away, right in the heart of the busy downtown financial district. As he shifted the car into drive and joined the heavy flow of evening traffic, Julian felt a sudden, fleeting surge of adrenaline and accomplishment. The city was absolutely flooding with tired commuters, stranded shoppers, and tourists, all desperate to get to their destinations. Every mile he drove and every passenger he dropped off meant immediate, visible numbers added to his digital wallet. He watched the dollar amount on the screen tick upward with a sense of pride, convincing himself that this extra momentum was exactly what he needed. He was tired from a full day of analyzing inventory data, but the thrill of making quick money pushed the exhaustion deep into the back of his mind.
By the third week, Julian felt like he was living two completely separate lives that were slowly beginning to collide. During the day, he was a quiet, predictable office employee who stared at inventory numbers and spoke only when spoken to. But at night, his car became a moving theater filled with an unpredictable cast of characters from every walk of life. He drove rowdy college students singing at the top of their lungs, exhausted nurses finishing 12-hour hospital shifts, and quiet couples who didn't say a word. Managing these two worlds required an immense amount of energy, and the physical toll was starting to show in his daytime routine. He began spending his lunch breaks at the corporate job sprinting out to the parking lot to power nap in the front seat of his car. He used his precious breaks to frantically vacuum crumbs from the mats and wipe down the leather seats with scented disinfectant. One Tuesday afternoon, his two worlds clashed when a sudden wave of exhaustion hit him during an important department meeting. His hand shook slightly as he reached for his travel mug, knocking it over and sending dark, hot coffee splashing across a stack of printed budget reports. "Sorry, I just didn't sleep well last night," Julian stammered, his face turning bright red as his supervisor frowned at the mess. The contrast between his quiet desk job and the chaotic nocturnal streets was becoming harder to navigate with each passing day. He was constantly adjusting the climate control, smiling at strangers, and offering polite small talk while his own brain felt completely hollow. The money was arriving in his bank account exactly as planned, but the physical price of keeping up appearances was rising rapidly.
The clock on the dashboard read 1:15 a.m., and the initial excitement of the side hustle had completely evaporated into the cold night air. Julian felt like a machine operating on autopilot, his hands gripping the steering wheel with a tight, desperate stiffness. The vibrant city that had felt so alive during the evening rush hour was now dark, quiet, and increasingly unforgiving. Every single mile felt longer than the last, and the glare of oncoming high beams cut through his eyes like sharp needles. To fight off the heavy fog settling over his brain, Julian blasted the air conditioner, forcing freezing air straight onto his face. The repeating loop of top 40 radio stations became a numbing, repetitive background noise that no longer kept him alert. He found himself checking the app after every single drop-off, praying that the next notification would be the final one for the night. 2 o'clock in the morning had become his personal finish line, a distant shore he had to reach before he could finally allow himself to collapse. But tonight, the minutes seemed to stretch like rubber, ticking backward instead of forward as he waited for the final passenger. He picked up a quiet man leaving a late-shift warehouse job, both of them trapped in a mutual, heavy silence born of pure exhaustion. Julian watched the road ahead, his vision blurring slightly around the edges as the streetlights blurred into long yellow streaks. He convinced himself that he only needed to hold on for 45 more minutes to secure his daily financial goal. He rolled the window down a crack, letting the icy wind whip against his neck, forcing his mind to ignore the deep ache in his muscles. He was running entirely on fumes, completely unaware of how dangerously close he was to crossing the line between fatigue and disaster.
It was exactly 1:45 a.m., and a heavy, rhythmic rain began to beat a steady pattern against the windshield. Julian had just dropped off his final passenger on a quiet suburban street and was heading toward the deserted expressway. The interior of the sedan was warm, quiet, and completely isolated from the cold world outside. The combination of the heater, the steady wiping of the blades, and his overwhelming sleep debt created a dangerous trap. Without warning, a massive wave of exhaustion pulled his thoughts downward into a deep, heavy darkness. Julian's heavy eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then closed completely for just 3 agonizing seconds. In that brief moment of darkness, the car drifted completely out of the lane and toward the concrete shoulder. Suddenly, a violent machine gun vibration exploded through the tires, shaking the entire vehicle with a terrifying roar. The car had hit the highway rumble strips at 60 miles per hour. Julian woke up instantly, his heart slamming violently against his ribs as an electric shock of adrenaline flooded his veins. He gasped loudly, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles and swerving sharply back into the center lane. The car fishtailed slightly on the wet asphalt before regaining traction, missing a solid concrete barrier by only a few inches. Suffocated by sudden panic, Julian pulled over to the side of the highway, his hands shaking so violently he could barely shift into park. He stared wide-eyed into the dark rain, breathing heavily as the terrifying reality of what almost happened washed over him. He had almost lost his life on a dark highway entirely for a $22 fare and a spreadsheet goal. Julian sat perfectly still in his parked car in the dark driveway until the first gray light of dawn broke over the horizon. His heart had finally stopped racing, but a heavy, cold numbness had taken its place, leaving him frozen behind the steering wheel. He eventually walked inside, but he spent the next 2 hours staring blankly at his bedroom ceiling, too wired on residual adrenaline and fear to actually fall asleep. When his alarm went off at 7 a.m., the sound felt like a physical blow to his head, forcing him back into a reality he could barely handle. The entire day at his corporate 9-to-5 job passed by in a dense, suffocating blur of paranoia and intense exhaustion. Every time he closed his eyes to blink, his mind instantly replayed the violent vibration of the tires and the gray flash of the concrete barrier. He sat at his desk typing numbers, but his mind was trapped on the highway, realizing how close he had come to a devastating tragedy. He looked at his phone on the desk, seeing the rideshare app icon, and felt a sudden, sharp wave of intense nausea. He realized with absolute clarity that he hadn't just almost ruined his vehicle, he had almost sacrificed his entire life for a miserable $22 fare. The precise spreadsheet that had once brought him so much comfort and a sense of control now felt like a dangerous golden trap. He felt completely powerless, caught between the terrifying fear of driving again and the relentless, suffocating pressure of his upcoming bills.
Julian kept the rideshare app completely turned off for 3 straight days, too terrified to sit in his car after dark. He tried to use the extra evening time to rest, but the immense sleep debt he had built up over weeks could not be repaid in just a few hours. His brain felt thick and heavy, and the chronic fatigue followed him straight into the office on Friday morning. He sat at his desk trying to complete the company's monthly inventory report, but the numbers on the screen began to blur together. His fingers moved mechanically across the keyboard, typing data, while his mind drifted in a state of semi-consciousness. Because he was operating in a complete fog, he accidentally entered a major shipment of electronics as a deficit instead of an asset. It was a massive, costly accounting error that threw off the entire department's budget projections for the upcoming quarter. An hour later, the heavy door to his manager's office swung open, and Mr. Davis called Julian inside with a stern, unsmiling face. "Julian, this is completely unlike you.
his manager said, pointing directly at the glowing red errors on the printed spreadsheet. "Your performance has drastically slipped over the last month, and you seem completely disconnected during our team meetings." Julian stammered a weak apology, his face burning with deep embarrassment as he received a formal verbal warning. He walked back to his desk with a heavy knot in his stomach, realizing the bitter irony of his current situation. In his desperate hustle to secure his finances outside of work, he was now actively endangering the primary job that paid his rent.
The middle of the month arrived, and the cold, unyielding reality of his upcoming rent payment forced Julian's hand. With a racing pulse and a deep sense of dread, he opened the rideshare app on a rainy Thursday night and went back online. He promised himself he would only do 3 quick rides and log off before midnight, but the psychological toll was immediate. As soon as the clock struck 11, a heavy, familiar anxiety settled into his chest, making it difficult to breathe. Every time he accelerated onto the expressway, his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. The highway felt haunted, and his mind began to play cruel tricks on him as the exhaustion mixed with paranoia. As he drove a quiet passenger down a dark stretch of the highway, Julian suddenly gasped and slammed his foot onto the brake pedal. He thought he had felt the violent machine gun vibration of the rumble strips, but the road beneath his tires was perfectly smooth. "Is everything okay up there?" the passenger asked from the back, her voice filled with sudden alarm and suspicion. "Yes, sorry, I just thought I saw an animal on the road," Julian lied, his heart hammering against his ribs as sweat broke out on his forehead. The phantom vibrations were a clear warning sign that his nervous system was completely fried from the chronic stress and lack of sleep. He dropped the passenger off safely, but he immediately pulled into a gas station parking lot and turned off the engine. He couldn't keep living on the razor-thin edge of a disaster, chasing dollars, while a ghost in his mind constantly threatened to crash the car. Julian sat at his kitchen table on Saturday afternoon, the blinds drawn to keep out the harsh afternoon sun. He opened his laptop and pulled up the precise spreadsheet that had dictated his grueling routine for the past 2 months. For the first time, he didn't focus on the rising numbers in the earnings column. Instead, he looked at his own tired face reflected in the screen. He had an honest, painful reckoning with his life, recognizing that his current trajectory was completely unsustainable. He began to delete the ambitious rideshare goals he had set, watching the projected income totals drop back down to 0. Instead of trying to outwork a flawed financial plan by trading his literal safety for hourly gig work, he changed his strategy entirely. He began to look for alternative ways to drastically slash his monthly expenses, looking for areas where he could compromise. He drafted an online advertisement to find a responsible roommate to share his 2-bedroom apartment, which would instantly cut his rent in half. He also canceled several unnecessary subscription services and created a strict basic grocery plan to minimize his spending. Finally, Julian opened a new folder on his desktop and began updating his resume, focusing on a long-term professional goal. Instead of exhausting himself at night, he decided to invest his precious energy into upskilling for a higher-paying daytime corporate role. He closed the laptop with a quiet sense of relief, realizing that true financial security could never be built on a foundation of human exhaustion.
The clock on his phone read 5 p.m. on a quiet Friday evening, signaling the official start of the weekend. Julian walked out of the office building, but this time he didn't feel the familiar heavy knot of dread in his stomach.
He walked straight to his silver sedan, unlocked the door, and placed his office bag carefully into the back seat. He sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, looking down at the ride-share app icon resting quietly on his smartphone screen. With a steady hand and a deep sense of closure, Julian tapped the icon, opened the settings, and permanently deleted the application. He shifted the car into drive and joined the evening traffic, heading straight home instead of toward the busy downtown financial district. When he arrived at his apartment, he didn't rush to clean the floors or prepare for an unpredictable night of driving strangers. Instead, he took his time cooking a healthy, real meal, listening to the peaceful sound of the evening rain outside his window. His financial pressure had not completely vanished, but his new roommate was moving in next week, and his budget was finally balanced. At precisely 10 p.m., Julian turned off the living room lights, walked into his bedroom, and climbed into his bed. He closed his eyes, and instead of replaying the terrifying flash of concrete barriers or hearing phantom vibrations, his mind was completely quiet. As he drifted into a deep, natural sleep, he finally understood that peace of mind, health, and survival were worth more than any hustle. Julian chose his health over the spreadsheet, stepping off the gas before it was too late. In a world that tells us to hustle 24/7, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is look at your life honestly and say, "This is unsustainable." Today, we explored some powerful expressions to describe stress and decision-making. Let's do a quick recap. To run on fumes, driving or working with zero energy left. A wake-up call, a dangerous moment that forces you to change. To step off the gas, to finally slow down and take care of yourself. Have you ever felt like you were running on fumes to bridge a financial gap? How do you balance modern life without burning out? Let me know in the comments below using one of today's new vocabulary words. You can find all the vocabulary of the story down below in the description box. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories and English lessons, and I will see you in the next story. Sleep well and take care of yourselves. Goodbye.